declare the territories that they already occupy within Western Iraq as their own and as independent Kurdistan. We think they should open that territory to anyone who self-identifies as a Kurd and give those individuals nationality, specifically within that territory, not within Turkey. Very important in this debate. We're okay with the US economically sponsoring that state until the point where it becomes independent. We're okay with the US protecting that state. We bite all those things that are set up. We're going to establish two elements. Why a state is better than integration, but more importantly, B, why a state is possible and only possible now, and because that is a possibility that might not exist in the future, you have to take it now. Then I'll illustrate this with most arguments. First argument, so why do we think a state that is better? I don't even think they're going to contest this, so I'm going to go quickly. But like in Turkey, Kurdish people are associated to organisms like the PKK, who Erdogan manipulates in order to scapegoat the Kurds as the problem of, as the source of economic problems within Turkey. They often are political scapegoats and victims of violence within that country, right? I think it is ludicrous for them to say that they are not victims of cultural abuse, while on the contrary, existing within Turkey at the moment is for them being victims of cultural abuse. So we think many Kurds also exist in Turkey, but don't even support the PKK, which is the radical Kurdish organization that exists within that country. And we argue those moderate Kurds under the status quo are harmed because they don't have access to a system which perceives them to be like people who should be living within Europe, right? So in Turkey, they're completely disenfranchised under the status quo. What about in Iraq? Let's say we assume that they're, well, at least partially integrated in Iraq today. We don't think that is a guarantee in the future. The only reason Kurdish people have gained a certain degree of independence right now is because the Iraqi government has its hands full with ISIS and cannot use its military power to maintain control over the regions in which those Kurdish people exist. I don't think you can have that in the future. On the contrary, I think in a region that is based on sectarianism, let's say ISIS leaves in the future, I think the Iraqi government could potentially use religious sectarianism again to alienate the Kurds to win like political bases in the way they have in the past. So even if right now they're okay in Iraq, I don't think they will be in the future. Why do you think it's principally better to have a state? Because in a state, you are the majority. You have the institutions to protect your way of life in a way that you do not have when you're the minority and exist under certain protections within Turkey or within Iraq. We also think you have a greater voice within the international community. They talk about summits. I don't think the two MPs that are in the Turkish government have particularly influenced the international summits that Turkey participates in. But if there were to be a state, then they necessarily would have to be integrated for the reasons I will tell you earlier in those summits, so we'll therefore have a greater voice. C, I think there's greater stability if you live in a system that isn't as vulnerable to change as one that is like protections for minorities, right? So you as a government can revoke protections for minorities if there is a particular populism within your own state. For example, Erdogan in 50 years working to exist in another person. But if you have your own state, it's difficult, it's much easier to exist because you can't just get rid of the state. The international community would not accept that if, for example, were to be established as a state in the near future. So you get greater stability, sure.
Okay, how does creating separate states reduce the possibility of animosity, of violence between the groups, rather than perhaps integrate them and trying to get them to get along, either like politically?
Well, I'll tell you what, that's my next point. So why is the time now? I think there are multiple actors. Let's talk about each. So A, I think Turkey will be perfectly fine with this. Three reasons. One, this isn't within the Turkish borders, so they do not lose any territory. But the main other argument is that if there were to exist a Kurdish state, it would be harder for the PKK to use the current rhetoric that it uses to radicalize Kurds, correct? You can't use the rhetoric that you are excluded, you do not have another state, you should revolt. If there exists a state in which you can exist as a Kurdish person. So I think a system of the PKK is weaker, is a system in which there are like, there's less terrorism within Turkey, is a system that Turkey might buy into. At least that gives us reasons as to what they want. The second thing is Iraq. So Iraq probably won't be okay with this, but what do we care? They can't do anything about it under the status quo because their resources are spread so thin by the fact that they have to fight ISIS. In the status quo, the Kurdish people have unique control over the regions that they live in at the moment that they never have had in recent history because the Iraqi government hasn't been able to prevent them from doing so because they're so busy fighting ISIS on the other side of the country and on other fronts. I think it is a unique opportunity you need to seize. Moreover, we think you have the most efficacious army in the region. So the Peshmerga are seen as one of the strongest military forces within that region, right? So you have the ability under status quo to protect yourself. I mean, the Peshmerga is going to be more organized than the Iraqi army because it's funded by the West, and because the West sees it as a value buy. So you have an army that can protect the borders of the own state. Where will the international community buy into this? And this is really important because the international community needs the Kurds and the Peshmerga to fight against ISIS in the way that they have. And that's been funded them recently and in the recent years. So you have this community, these groups that you know the international community needs you to fight ISIS, and probably see ISIS as a greater threat to them as the West than you see like a piss off Erdogan, right? So if you put this ISIS is the priority of the West right now, you ought to use that as the Kurdish people in order to seek to create a state. Moreover, I think you do have these resources, like oil is a really, okay, I'll just that a bit later. So I think what the principle here is you have a unique opportunity right now that you might not have in the future. Let's assume the best case scenario, which is today you can achieve political integration in the way these guys want you to. There is no guarantee that in 30 years you will still have those gains. There's no guarantee that the political conjecture will not change. And there's also no guarantee that in 30 years you will be able to seek independence in the way that you can today. I think you have an obligation to protect future generations of Kurds and establish that state today because you do not know whether you might have it in the future. That is the principle on which we believe in our practice today on what do these guys say? You don't get international recognition at full July. Turkey won't want this at full July. They live. Open borders. So if you buy the argument that Turkey would be okay with this, then I don't see why the border with Turkey and the access to Europe to sell that oil would not exist. They have to establish why Turkey would be pissed, and I don't think they've defended that quite well yet under us. They tell us people won't want to move to that country because they establish ties within Turkey. Okay, maybe some won't, but if a portion of them do, that makes the Turkish government happy because you get rid of a minority that shouldn't be existing within your state. Moreover, it doesn't respond to the argument about the prerogative that the PKK uses that it can no longer use on our side of the house. They tell us the economy isn't diversified, oil isn't enough. We're totally okay with the West like sponsoring your economy in order to allow it to survive for the first years until it does either that diversify. And you can also with a rich agricultural domain within like the Kurdish territories right now, and we're okay with basing our econ case on that. I think I've addressed everything they said. So the case we stand for is establishing an independent Kurdistan within the regions that are already occupied within Iraq. We think we can do that right now, and we have the obligation to do it just because we maybe could not do it in the future. That is not the reason for us to make it. Thank you.